There's a video before this that is all about adjusting the points. This is about replacing the points and the condenser. Basically, a good chunk of the ignition system. So if you want the details on how the points work and how to set timing, watch that video after this one, or maybe before, or maybe just keep watching them over and over. After failing to fix my Honda sputtering problem through adjusting the timing, I have bought replacement points and a condenser. And if this doesn't work, I would then look at the ignition coil. But it does end up working, so I won't be doing that. The locking screw is the only thing that holds the points on. Then loosen the nut and remove the blue wire. Even though I have new old stock Honda OEM points, my original had a JIS Phillip-like head on the wire connection, and my new one does not. It would have been a better experience had I swapped those bolts because it was a pain to reconnect the wire. Mostly because the electrical spring, or whatever you want to call it, slipped out, and tightening everything down while holding the two connectors in place was really annoying. But other than that, it's very straightforward. And now we have to put the flywheel back on and use a feeler gauge to set timing. In my first points video, I used a feeler gauge to set opening timing, did a strobe test, then took off the flywheel and adjusted it in the direction it needed to go. I wasn't using a feeler gauge after that because the flywheel was off and the points have nothing to hit to open them, and the feeler gauge is for setting the opening gap, which you can't do if the points don't open. And I took the flywheel off because it's easier to see what's going on, because I just couldn't get a good shot doing it how it is in the user manual. Now, if you're just opening the access panel, you would keep using the feeler gauge until you've got timing set. And to start off, you're just putting the feeler gauge in there while the points are open, lining up the F mark with the index to close down the points on the gauge, loosening the locking nut, pushing the breaker into the feeler gauge, then tightening the locking nut. Then you would check timing. I'm testing with a timing gun. For the first strobe tests, the timing is advanced, so I need to rotate it a little. Like really little, to the right, or delay the F mark 1/8 of an inch to the left of the index, if I were using the feeler gauge user manual recommended way to do it. So that way would be to set the points to open a little after the F mark reaches the index, right? Like, so that way you keep track of where the F mark has been to know if you need to go backwards or forwards. Right now the engine is hard to start and dies out, but rather than get the timing perfect, I'm going to move over to the condenser before coming back to this. Because if I install a new one and it runs better at this setting, I will know that the condenser was the real problem. My condenser tests went nothing like I expected them to, but supposedly to test a currently installed condenser, you have to put something non-conductive between the points to break the circuit, then set your multimeter to ohms. The head is positive and the side is negative ground. It should start at 0, then rise to as high as it'll go. So this is a test of if it can charge up and hold a charge. Now, if this condenser is malfunctioning, which it is, yes, it all came down to a $12 part.
That's it. That was the story.
The second test is set to volts. It will go up to any number, it doesn't really matter, then drop back to 0, but you can stop halfway and it should resume at the voltage you left off at. And this is a test of its ability to charge and discharge. I bought 2 new condensers. At least one of them definitely works, so the tests are just confusing to me. For the volts test, it seemed to only work after I did the charge test. Like, I can only discharge the condenser after it was charged by the ohms test. So yes, it could be all me not knowing how to use my multimeter. Removing this is as hard as it looks like it will be. These wires are connected with a death grip of folded metal and solder. The bottom 2 wires have enough slack you can get away with just cutting them. Obviously, check yours to make sure there is slack. They may not all be the same. But for me, the wire for the right coil has nothing extra. Not that you can't graft a little extra length on there, but either way.
This is hard.
Some condenser mounts have a holder for this felt flywheel shaft cleaner, and all the C100 eBay ones I found did not have one. So I have to cut the old mount off my condenser. All I can find that were like mine were labeled as Z50 for the monkey and CT70 trail. So you'd think it would be fine. I installed this condenser because it looks more like my old one, but I ended up having clearance issues, mainly caused by the pound of solder I used, so I ended up going with the smaller one. Yeah, I'm not very good at soldering either. Basically, I installed it, tried to start the bike, it didn't start. I took off the flywheel and saw the solder was rubbed flat on top and it was grounding out on the flywheel. So I swapped the felt holder so it was on top so the condenser could rest a little lower. Now you'd think that if the solder was rubbed flat and then I dropped the condenser a little, everything would be fine. Oh yeah, and I also tested for spark. Now here's the stupid part. There's gas in the tank, but it's below the reserve line and I had it set to open. So I wasn't getting gas. And then I uninstalled the entire thing and put in the smaller condenser. Also, my dad showed up as he is wont to do when I'm in the middle of hardcore failing at something, and did the soldering because he's just better at it than I am. But yeah, if I had spark, it should have started. So, waste of time or life lesson learned? It's all part of the process. Before putting the flywheel on, add wheel bearing grease to the flywheel shaft to, grease it up. Instantly, it starts easier than it has in a long time and runs better too, but timing is still advanced, so I'm doing a slight tap to the right to delay. It's very easy to nudge it forward to the right when you're tightening the locking screw, so use a second flathead to be able to hold it in place so it can't slide forward when you tighten it. And also, you're giving it a barely perceptible tap forward in this case. So now timing's right on the mark. It runs better than it ever runs since I've had it, and with the new points, the sparks are more consistent. They don't ricochet away like they were before. So despite all my frustrations and self-doubt, this was a success, and finally, I can start commuting with this bike again.
Everything's coming up Millhouse.
Changing the points is easy, and it was probably worthwhile. Changing the condenser is very hard, on older bikes especially, because it's not just a thing you plug in. Yeah, it's actually not very hard on newer bikes because they come with connectors. Obviously, if you're better at soldering than I am, it's not quite as hard, but you're not given a lot to work with. For the past 10 years and 7,000 miles, I've always had issues with letting this bike idle. It would either choke itself out, probably because of the condenser, or burn oil, because I needed to replace the piston and rings. But last year, everything got bad enough that it was a problem while actually riding. If you want to get your 50 back to how it ran when it was new, replacing a $12 condenser really makes a difference.